Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Saturday Matinee. It's a really, really lovely morning to spend here with all of you. My name is Daria, and our wonderful co-host here is Andrew, and we're with the Denver Public Library. Today, we're supporting the discussion of Blood and Black Lace. It's a breathtaking giallo movie by the great Mario Bava. To all our returning guests, it's wonderful to have you back with us. To our new friends, welcome. We hope you stick around. We have fun like this every Saturday. Keep it lively in the chat and use the Q&A. Ask your burning questions. And if you have any technical issues, message myself or Andrew. Would be happy to do our best and help you out. And your recommended movies and books will be sent out after the event concludes. So just sit back, relax. Don't worry about taking any notes. And now join me in welcoming our beloved movie critic, Walter Chaw, and writer-director, Edgar Wright.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to keep my opening remarks very brief, hopefully, today. I always say hopefully because I go on long diversions. I apologize in advance. I'm going to keep them brief because I'm not really the star of the show today. The star of the show is the inimitable Edgar Wright, and we'll get to him really soon. The opening thing that we watched today, the opening video, the first thing that we watched was the American credits, the Americanized credits of For Blood and Black Lace. Upon its release in the United States, the distributors, the Warner Brothers, wanted a more creepy opening, something that was a little bit scarier. So, mannequins being innately frightening, I guess. They put together that little thing, but I think it's kind of an interesting alternative. I adore the Bava's opening credit sequence. It's so wry and funny and self-referential. In fact, the identity of one of the killers is pointed out by one of the mannequins during his opening scene. Cameron Mitchell is being pointed at by the red mannequin, but I adore it, but I also like the American credit sequence, so I thought it was a worthy look. And our brilliant and gifted librarian host today, Daria, she put together that vibe reel of Blood and Black Lace, the second video clip that we saw. I love it because it allows, free of the plot, free of trying to follow, free of all of that stuff, just to look at the real beauty of this movie, the way that Bava shoots it. I think, for my money, hopefully Edgar agrees. We'll see. That Bava, from this period of Italian filmmaking, is as important a filmmaker as Michelangelo Antonioni, Sergio Leone, Visconti, Bertolucci, all of the greats that we know about, that we have acknowledged into the canon. Add Bava to it. He worked on much smaller budgets. He worked with lower tier actors, I would say, casts, friends and B actors, I guess you would say. But he put together a really remarkable filmography. We'll talk a little bit more about Bava in a second, but I want to mention someone else, a key player in Blood and Black Lace and the giallo subgenre of horror film from Italy in the 1960s. His name is Edgar Wallace. He's a Londoner. He was born in 1857, I think it was. He was illegitimate. He was sort of given up for adoption very, very early on. His mother remained part of his life until he was about 11 or 12 years old, at which point she sort of just disappeared from his life until very much later, when she was, I think, 60-something. She found Edgar Wallace after he'd become successful as an author, very ill, lifetime of poverty, and asked for money, and Edgar Wallace coldly turned her away, and she died later that same year. But Edgar Wallace was, a tramp, a layabout. He went through a lot of different phases. He did a lot of different things. Eventually, he found his calling as sort of a war correspondent in the Congo, not a war, sort of a revolution, genocide correspondent. And he began writing dispatches from there, and those eventually became novels. And the course of his career, he was sort of notorious for how prolific he was. He could write a 70,000-word novel in 3 days. He did so by dictating it onto those wax tubes, and then his secretaries would type them up. He didn't have any editing. He decried editors. Most of his books are first drafts. He wrote 170 novels. He wrote 957 short stories. He wrote 12 novels in 1929 that were published alone. His stuff, he wrote 18 plays as well. One of them in 1932 was called Whiteface. It was about a jewel thief who wore a blank mask as his disguise. A little bit of foreshadowing influence there. But his experience in Africa resulted in a series of books called Sanders in the jungle, essentially. Sanders of the River, Sanders of the whatever. They were eventually turned into a movie starring Paul Robeson in 1935, indicated by really horrific racism, I would say, and colonial attitudes. But the foundation of another sort of subgenre of Italian films, the Mondo Cane subgenre of cannibal movies, have a lot to do with these Edgar Wallace novels. The other thing that Edgar Wallace did, though, was these thrillers, and they were picked up by West Germany in a series of Krimi films in the 1960s, 32 adaptations of these movies. And they all had certain elements to them. They were whodunits, sometimes convoluted whodunits, not really narratively strung together, because he was dictating these things, 2 a week. And there's usually a masked killer or a glove killer, at least. And these were pretty popular in Italy. When we get there, well, let's talk a little bit about Italy. They have an interesting history of horror, right? In the silent era, they had a movie like L'Inferno in 1911, which has a really remarkable image of Satan eating a sinner's soul. Is really remarkable. In 1917, there was Satanic Rhapsody, that has an image of Satan coming out of a painting, which is kind of reflected in, no pun intended, in Blood and Black Lace with Claude Dante's in that red scene with the mirror. Maciste in Hell in 1925. A lot of interesting stuff. But then a guy named Benito Mussolini took control in 1922, and he instituted, along with fascism, all this stuff, a real Puritan code in Italian cinema. You were not allowed to do very much anymore, and in culture as well. Things like divorce, things like adultery, all these things became illegal, and certainly you can reflect them in films. So during that period of time, this is when the Venice Film Festival was born as well, to sort of show off fascist thought in cinema. There was a genre in Italian cinema called white telephone, Telefone Bianchi. And the white telephone movies during the 1930s in Italy were very much, cheerful. Shirley Temple Curls, the sort of Leave It to Beaver of Italy, light-hearted, and always sort of ended with the reunification and the justification, glorification of conservative Italian culture. I mentioned the white telephone because the sets were all white Art Deco sets, beautiful sets, with white telephones that the little people couldn't afford. It was it's like a golden toilet, let's say. And then when we watch Blood and Black Lace, we see a lot of red telephones and a black telephone in a key moment. So this is a red telephone movie, if you will, sort of a commentary on Italy's own history. Post-war, as we're coming out of the war in Italy, we begin to see more Gothic history, some witch burnings and stuff that lead into the 1950s, where horror comes back in Italian cinema with a movie called I Vampiri, directed by Mario Bava. He was not the director at the beginning of it. His buddy was, and then his friend Frida walked away, and he took over and directed the rest of it. If you get a chance to see I Vampiri, you must see it. There's a scene where it's sort of, I think, Near Dark, the great American vampire movie, borrows from. Bava goes on to make an amazing run of films. He made in 1958 a movie called The Day the Sky Exploded, which is considered to be the first Italian science fiction film. He made Caltiki, the Immortal Monster, which is one of the great, I think, forgotten movies from 1960. And then Black Sunday in 1960 with Barbara Steele, which begins with Barbara Steele getting a mask hammered onto her face with spikes. We see sort of an idea of that reflected in Blood and Black Lace today. He did art design on a couple of Hercules movies before that. He worked on Kirk Douglas's movie, Ulysses. And he also did a movie called Hercules in the Haunted World in 1961, which you must see as well. He's credited with making the first giallo, and giallo refers to the yellow covers of the pulp paperback fictions that were sold and sort of in ill repute in Italy. Good people didn't read that, not in public anyway. And Edgar Wallace was one of the main people who was published under the giallo title. And so the influence here of Edgar Wallace becomes fascinating with giallo. Giallo is indicated by these elaborate mystery plots, these elaborate murder sequences, extreme gore, and extreme eroticism too, going hand in hand. Yeah. So the first giallo is considered by most to be Mario Bava's Girl Who Knew Too Much in 1963. Immediately after that, in 1964, we get to Blood and Black Lace. Later, I want to talk, hopefully, if we can get our conversation back around to that place. We'll force it if we can't, to Warren Beatty's Dick Tracy in 1990, because I love and I might be the only person who does. Okay. Well, that's not fair or true. Other things to look out for in Mario Bava's filmography. If you're hooked after Blood and Black Lace, please watch Black Sabbath. It's an anthology film. It's brilliant. The Whip and the Body, which is an S&M version of an Edgar Allan Poe. I won't tell you more about that. But yeah, there's some ghost whipping, and the ghost is doing the whipping in that movie. It's very sexy. Planet of the Vampires, which I think has a strong influence on Alien of all movies. One of Martin Scorsese's famous, most favorite movies, Kill Baby Kill from 1966. And there's a sequence in Kill Baby Kill that Scorsese lifts for Last Temptation of Christ. So take that as you will. A really great spy movie called Danger Diabolique from 1968, which is just the freaking coolest. If you know that movie, if I can ever, have the means to build a shower like the ones that they have, it's a his and hers half shower. It's just, yeah, it's freaking awesome. And he arguably invented the slasher genre, with Halloween and Friday the 13th and Black Christmas, with 1971's Bay of Blood, which has one of the most inexplicable and awesome endings of any movie ever made. Okay. There's also was a lost film called Rabid Dogs, which is a key influence on Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs. And Tarantino is a loud and awesome fan of Mario Bava as well. The influence is broad and deep and wide, and which brings us gracefully, seamlessly into a transition to introducing our guest today. He is the director of some of your favorite movies and some of mine. We met after the little American press tour that he and Simon Pegg and Nick Frost did for Shaun of the Dead. We had lunch at Planet Hollywood in Denver, which is not, yeah.
I did on that bit.
Oh man, yeah, not great. But we talked about Sidney Lumet, and I realized that all of the really, really, really smart moments in Shaun of the Dead were not by accident. That this was indeed the product of some really, really smart guys. I went backwards in time and I watched Spaced, 14 episodes of perfection of British television. The third episode of that, by the way, is zombie themed. And I realized that here's a guy who likes all of the right things and knows enough about them to speak about them in his movies the right way. We've all seen movies, I think, with people who do imitations, and they're just sort of imitations. But when you watch a movie like Shaun of the Dead or Hot Fuzz or World's End, you see and not only a cunning recreation of a lot of the things that made those movies work that we love and we're talking about, but a real understanding from a critical perspective of what those movies were actually about. And so his voice is incredibly valuable. He's working right now on a movie called Last Night in Soho. It's gorgeous. Yeah, I haven't seen it, of course. It's not finished. But what I have seen is just really, really fantastically beautiful. And when I asked Edgar if he would be interested in doing this with us, he gave a couple of lists and of things that he might be interested in doing. And looking them over, I was like, what are you making in Last Night in Soho? It's going to be fucking insane. So I can't contain my excitement almost to introduce a good friend, a brilliant filmmaker, artist, a funny guy, and a really, really, really smart movie guy, Edgar Wright.
What an intro, my God. I completely forgotten that we had lunch at Planet Hollywood in Denver.
Yeah.
I remember the hotel. We were at the Brown Palace. Is that right?
Yes.
It's amazing that hotel has not been in a horror film. Or maybe it has, but that deserves to be in, right?
It's deeply haunted. There's actually a book about it in Denver. It's the most haunted place in Denver, I think.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add to what you were saying. There was lots of things in your intro that sparked. It's interesting. It's funny that when I was growing up, I didn't know any other Edgars. I'd never met another Edgar. There weren't really other like Edgars in like actors or famous people. And the only Edgars that I'd ever hear about growing up were Edgar Allan Poe, Edgar Rice Burroughs, and Edgar Wallace. And I don't think I ever read an Edgar Wallace book, but they used to have, I want to say, maybe it was the films repackaged or TV series called Edgar Wallace Mysteries. But I was always like sort of I was always like buoyed by the fact there were other Edgars. So it's interesting that I've never seen any of the Edgar Wallace German movies, which I'd like to kind of like explore. But to add to what you said about Mario Bava, I mean, it's funny when we went through the list of films to talk about, we narrowed down on some Bava movies, including Black Sunday and Blood and Black Lace and Black Sabbath. And I said, let's do one of the color ones. Because as much as I mean, I love Girl Who Knew Too Much and I love Black Sunday, but Blood and Black Lace is one of those movies, and we were talking about this earlier, is I've seen it many times over the years, and like a lot of horror movies of this kind of period, they're usually like movies that I've read so much about before I've seen them. Being like a horror fan before I was old enough to see the movies, I used to be like, I'm sure a lot of people have this experience of reading up about them, whether it's in the Psychotronic Video Guide or Danny Peary's cult movies or like issues of Starburst and Fangoria. So Blood and Black Lace is one of those movies, or Kim Newman's Nightmare movies, that book. Anyway, I'd read a lot about it. And then when you saw it on VHS, I'm pretty sure that it was only recently that I saw the Arrow 4K restoration is stunning, because for a long period, I feel like Blu-ray and these 4K restorations that are finally coming around are sort of restoring these films to the glory they have been missing for like 30, maybe like 35 years. Because unfortunately, a lot of these movies, Blood and Black Lace included, you know, were relegated to pretty crappy VHSs. And so whilst you really had to kind of watch them and enjoy them in context and try and imagine what it was like to see it like at the time. And now finally, you know, these 4K restorations are just absolutely stunning. And I don't think until I got that Arrow Blu-ray, I'd ever seen the original Italian credits, which was stunning to me because it's funny. I feel like the Italian credits, which are a lot more playful and actually give you, they allow you to enjoy the movie in a way maybe the American credits don't. Because one of the things that I think about Blood and Black Lace is like a lot of giallo films and a lot of Italian horror films at the time, they obviously feature a lot of women dying. I mean, it's literally in the title. The Italian title is 6 Women for the Assassin, or Sei a donna per l'assassino. I didn't say that right, but the thing about Blood and Black Lace is, I think why it's brilliant to me is it kind of has its cake and eats it, because it's set in a fashion house, and in a way the movie is like sort of being more savage about the fashion industry maybe than it is about the killing. And also the other interesting thing about this, and it's something that I always find fascinating, is a lot of the giallos do that thing, and Blood and Black Lace is no exception, where one of the killers is a woman, and it always seems like their way of like having their cake and eating it, of like, so you think this is a very misogynistic film, do you? Or what if we told you the killer was actually a woman? Or in this movie, one of the killers is a woman. But that said, is that even aside from that, I think sort of like Mario Bava, like sort of, because it's set in a fashion house, and I think the working title, I was just reading like Tim Lucas's amazing book and his commentary. If you want to know more about the movie, listen to Tim Lucas's commentary. The working title for the movie in English was The Fashion House of Death. And when I've tried to describe this movie to people, I say, imagine like a horror movie that's like a Vogue Italia spread. I mean, it's funny you said about like that vibe reel to sort of just turn off the sound and enjoy. I'm a sort of big believer in doing that with movies anyway. The greatest storytellers in cinema are directors whose work you can turn off the sound and understand what's happening. And I weirdly had that experience in Italy when I was quite young. I went to this, my first film called Fistful of Fingers was in this Italian Euro Western festival, and in Udine. And I went there, I think it was in 1997. And I went there and they were showing only Westerns not made in the States. And I thought, this is great. It's a like 4-day weekend. Like, and they got British movies, French movies, Spanish movies, Italian movies, every country in the world except the States. It's an Italian film festival. So I thought, this is great. I'm going to introduce my movie, do a Q&A, and then I'll watch all the other movies. But then I realized, oh, I'm in Italy. They're not going to have English subs, and they're not going to have like, an in-ear thing. So I wasn't going to go back to my hotel. I thought, I'm just going to sit and watch these Italian movies in Italian. And I'm going to watch these French movies with Italian dubbing. And the big lesson learned was that if you just kind of like watch the movie, you can, if it's well directed, you can totally understand what's happening. And like Blood and Black Lace is exactly that kind of movie where you can turn the sound down and understand exactly what's happening. Free of all the red herring kind of like sort of plotting and stuff. It just totally makes sense, with the sound off. And so I mean, it's one of those movies that I liked it when I saw it the first time on VHS, even though it was like a terrible copy and probably hacked to pieces and had the American credits. But it's one of those movies that keeps revealing itself to me. The more I watch it, the more I think it's like such a stunning piece of work and so kind of ornate and gorgeous. And it almost feels like a bit like a horror version of like a Max Ophuls film. Like Max Ophuls, like sometimes his films feel like wedding cakes. It's like oh my God, like this is such an ornate, it's like looking at a cuckoo clock or something. And like this, and I don't mean this in any way of like to sort of like belittle the film, because it sounds like I'm sort of like I'm cheapening it, but it's almost like the ultimate horror Pinterest page, Blood and Black Lace. It's just so stunningly beautiful to look at that you could just pretty much print every other shot and put it on the wall. It's so stunning, those tableaus. And sorry, I just rambled for ask a question. Sorry.
No. Keep rambling. That's brilliant. And when you talk about the beauty of this film and how every frame is indeed a painting. Beauty is such a key, I think, theme of Blood and Black Lace, and the destruction of beauty. Like the murders are all sort of the mortification of their faces, and then they're sort of arranged in these tableau mort. And you talk about this sort of ironic commentary, this vicious commentary about the fashion industry and what we do to models, right? And I think about the tiny little subplot with the diary. It's a big subplot, it's a big, awesome tracking scene and all those things. But the reason that she destroys it, Peggy destroys the diaries, because there's a story of abortion in it, and she's doing kind of a nice thing to get rid of the diary. And in my mind now, as I watch it when I'm older, it's like, okay, so it's commenting on the fascist state, the church, all of those things in Italy, but it's also commenting, I think, on the fashion industry that there's not a lot of space in the 1960s, especially for a pregnant model. Was she forced into this decision for some other reason than health or career or whatever? In order for a woman to succeed here, she needs to be childless. She needs to have this abortion, and it's still a scandal and still all these things. And but it's in here, and the more that you look at this movie and you see this as a commentary about and it's the mannequins that are always sort of mute Greek chorus to what's happening. They seem to know what's going on whenever you see the red mannequin, for instance, or what are they looking at, what are they seeing? And it has its cake and it eats it too. It has its Max Ophuls cake and eats it too. But there's more. And the way that the female murderer has been gaslit, essentially, to use a modern term now, into these murders, and at the end of it rejects her abuser, and the person who's gaslighting her is actually kind of a strong statement. And far be it from me to be making any definitive statements about feminism. I'm not qualified, but it has felt to me like a different movie than some of the other ones. There's stuff like New York Ripper that is just,
oh no,
it's just so reprehensible. I can't really, I can't defend it. But a movie like Blood and Black Lace is like, this is very complicated. What's happening in Blood and Black Lace, and I would argue, indeed, even in the rest of Bava's movies, when you have The Whip and the Body, which is about incestual S&M and with Christopher Lee. I mean, it's there's something going on in Bava's movies that I think should not just go as another one of these jollies or another one of these films of this type.
Well, it also builds up to like I mean, it's funny. It's sort of slightly ahead of the curve because I was watching that Alexander McQueen documentary recently that I'd sort of forgotten about the huge furore around his initial shows. I forget the name of the show that would cause it was but there was a show based around essentially around sex crimes and murders, and and he did this kind of like infamous show, Alexander McQueen, where like the models were wearing like ripped kind of like outfits, and then in this movie, like the killer arranges the dead bodies in like a kind of fashion tableau, which is exactly the kind of, I mean, it feels like it's sort of ahead of the curve in terms of like, like sort of fashion actually went that way. Like some of those like images, like you wouldn't be surprised to have seen that in some of the more sort of disturbing kind of like sort of fashion spreads of the last like 20 years. I mean, particularly that amazing bit where there's the two models on top of each other and reflected in the kind of the glass coffee table. I wasn't actually, I'll admit, it wasn't until I listened to Tim Lucas's commentary that I'd noticed that thing that Bava does where he has that, what's described as the angel in the wreckage, which is after one of the victims is killed, that you have this kind of shot where it'll pan up to a cherub, or it'll have they're given some moment of peace. So there's this idea of like the soul leaving the body. I mean, that doesn't like make up for the fact they just lost their life, but like I like that, like you said, in stark contrast to something utterly reprehensible like the New York Ripper, there's something sort of where the sort of painterliness of like Blood and Black Lace, I feel like you like I said, the sort of the framing of it almost kind of gets away with the sort of the shock and outrage. I mean, also I think it's just playful as well. It's obviously there's a tongue in cheek about it. I mean, that brilliant shot where what's her name? Is it Eve Arden? Not Eve Arden, Mary Arden. When her body is like sort of pulled behind the what do you call it? Not I'm blanking on my fashion terms. The screen. But when that great shot when the dead body is just dragged out of vision, there's all these amazing like tableaus that just the victim that's then beautifully poised underneath the suit of armor. I mean, it's not without a sense of humor, and it's that thing where I'm sure, like I'm sure also like in a kind of more brutal, like savage, like drive-in American cut, it probably lost any element of that grace in some faded, scratchy print. So I'm glad that these movies are actually being restored, because I agree with you. What you said in the intro is I feel like Mario Bava is one of those directors because his films are in the horror genre. He's seen as a second-tier director, and even within the horror genre, I always find that like a lot of film fans only have room for one director's name in any particular subgenre. So Italian horror, it's like Dario Argento, and then sadly, like most people would say, Lucio Fulci before they say Mario Bava. But Mario Bava really, as Dario Argento himself would say, was the kind of the granddaddy of so many techniques. And because he started as a cameraman, he really is like a sort of a director that any person wanting to make a low budget film should watch, because he's incredibly efficient and economical and can make things look incredibly elegant on not a lot of money. And I mean, you mentioned Danger Diabolique. That's a film to watch if you want to see how you can get maximum bang for your buck. And this movie too, it's interesting. Like you mentioned about, there's the tracking shots. There's that amazing sequence around the purse when she puts the diary in the purse and then the purse is put on the table. There's some amazing like sort of composition, like when you see like somebody touch the table and then you see another person framed through the handles of the purse. But then there's that tracking shot, unbroken. And if you read up about it, like Mario Bava couldn't afford like a dolly. He was using like a child's wagon. as a track, which is just sort of extraordinary. And then also it's worth pointing out, there's so many things that are in this movie that are like the first time that they're done, like the idea of the killer's point of view, like a shot which is then in, especially after Halloween, in every single horror movie of all time, the killer's point of view. But those shots where the sort of the camera is gliding around, like being the sort of the point of view of the killer and knocking over those amazing wicker mannequins, that's the first time that shot is done. And I think it's maybe because Mario Bava himself, by all accounts, seemed to be pretty modest and would be the last person to sing his own praises. It makes me I'm very glad that these films are being restored in this form, because I think without them, if they weren't these 4K restorations, I think the name Mario Bava could slip into obscurity too easily. And it requires other people to sort of like Dario Argento or Martin Scorsese to kind of like sing his praises for like younger film fans to know who he is. I was always aware of them through reading horror books and stuff, but up until recently, sometimes they just weren't easy to get hold of. And then even if you did get hold of them, you weren't sure if you were seeing the best version. So I feel very like happy that in recent years I've seen really great versions of like Kill Baby Kill and Blood and Black Lace and Black Sabbath and Bay of Blood. The other interesting thing, one other thing I want to mention. So I think some people like the use of color in these movies, which is extraordinary, and his use of contrasting primary colors. I think then Dario Argento, especially with Suspiria, sort of took that, maybe popularized that effect even more. So when people see that effect in horror movies, they usually say Dario Argento, when in truth it was Mario Bava first. But I realized that even before I'd seen any Dario Argento films, that effect was in so many music videos of the 80s. And it wasn't until I saw those videos again. I remember that I happened to see Billy Idol's video for White Wedding. And I was like, my God, this is just straight out of like Hatchet for the Honeymoon, the Mario Bava film. And what was just interesting to me is that thing where you sort of go backwards. It's like, oh, is this a Dario Argento thing? No, this is a Mario Bava thing. And so to keep going back to the sort of like the head streams of the style, who came up with this first. It's really extraordinary. And I feel like the thing about Mario Bava is I think you always need to put him in context. So it's great to do a talk like this, is rather than talk about something much better known, it's sort of better to sort of like keep kind of like singing the praises of these movies that like deserve more love.
So the masked killer, the blank-faced masked killer, Dick Tracy, Chester Gould in 1937 did a villain called the Blank. And that's sort of from an Edgar Wallace, the white-faced thing. And then, of course, we have modern iterations of that with like Roy Schock and Watchmen and stuff like that. But, the sort of blank-faced villain. When Warren Beatty made Dick Tracy in 1990, see, I did it. I brought it all the way back. And he also had the villain, the Blank. And in that movie, spoiler alert, the Blank is actually Breathless Mahoney, Madonna, in it, in sort of a gender reversal, much like there's a sort of a gender thing that you mentioned, Edgar, about the identity of the killer in Blood and Black Lace. And so there's a really weird sort of, all the way from Edgar Wallace through Chester Gould through Mario Bava, and then through Warren Beatty, you have this sort of conversation that films are having with each other. And when I watch your movies, Edgar, I see that conversation happening all the time. I feel like I'm in conversation with you, just at Planet Hollywood, talking about movies and all the movies that you love and what you think the movies are and how they feed into the films. I mean, World's End is sort of this love letter to these alien invasion possession movies that I adore. The Kaufman Body Snatchers, all these things, and it's a remarkable ongoing conversation. I know that whenever you start a film, you give your cast a list of movies to watch. Could you share with us some of the titles that are on last night in Soho? And if you don't know them off the top of your head, I have it sitting right in front of me.
I mean, well, Blood and Black Lace was definitely one of them. I mean, one thing that's interesting that, like, to preface this is like part of my, I don't want to talk about last night in Soho too much, but one of the like inspirations for it was I was trying to find a way to reframe movies like this because, like, as much as I think that there's a sort of artfulness and a playfulness to Blood and Black Lace, that, like I said, it has its cake and eats it. It would not fly now. Like, you couldn't make that movie now, and it would, like, sort of, regardless of like the sort of like the satiric nature, or like the like I said, the playfulness of the wink that you literally get in the opening credits, where, like, somebody winks at you, and so there are movies that I like. It's tricky because with the horror genre, there's an element of the horror genre that's transgressive, but I think there are probably a lot of movies that, like, just you would not get made today, like Psycho, like, like Dress to Kill, like a lot of the giallo movies, in fact. So, one of the things with Last Night in Soho is trying to find a way to reframe that. So, like, sort of like some of the kind of the things that I like about those movies could be told in a different way. So I think sort of some of the movies I just mentioned were films that I asked the cast and crew to watch. And then I guess, like, I mean, there's not really, I always find it funny, actually, that they're called giallos, like you said, after the yellow paperback, when it's funny that, a better term would be Rosso. Because in a way, probably the best giallo of all time is probably Profondo Rosso, Dario Argento's Deep Red. But just that very title, Profondo Rosso, seems to speak like the color red is like a better color than yellow. So it's always funny to me that it's like yellow isn't particularly indicative of what you're about to see. But I'm trying to think, there are not really that many like sort of British giallos in a way. I guess like it's not the same film, but it has some of the same imagery, is Michael Powell's Peeping Tom. And I say same imagery is that it's unusual to have horror films of that period be shot in Technicolor, because usually the theory at that time, and Psycho being a great example, is that Hitchcock sort of felt that Hitchcock's previous films to Psycho were in color, North by Northwest and Vertigo, but the decision to make Psycho in black and white is he felt it would be more dramatic. And there's a lot of sense in that, and I totally understand it. And then you get these other films like Blood and Black Lace or Peeping Tom, where it's so eye-poppingly vivid that it adds a whole extra layer of like, in Peeping Tom's case, it makes it more lurid. In Blood and Black Lace's case, I think it makes it strangely more elegant, even though you're watching these horrific murders. So, and my movie is in color. So, that was definitely, some of those films that are like sort of horror films or thrillers that are shot in Technicolor, like William Wyler's The Collector, or I'm trying to think of some other ones that are on that list.
Black Narcissus. I don't know if
Black
that's
Narcissus, which is kind of like a borderline, not really a horror film. I mean, definitely a psychological drama, but I think it always gets mentioned in horror books, Black Narcissus, because it's on the kind of the fringes, and like what that film climaxes in is like, an amazing literal cliffhanger. I mean, I feel that film, Black Narcissus, is probably the best Technicolor film. It's just
oh my god,
gorgeous and shocking, and
sexy.
What's the actress's name? Is it Kathleen Byron? Is that the... Yes. So the scene where she comes out of the doorway with her red lipstick on, it looks so shockingly contemporary when you watch it now. It feels like some of the other shots in the movie look like they're from the 40s, but that particular moment when she comes out of the door wearing her red lipstick feels like a movie from today. If you've never seen that movie, it's just astonishing. And every time I watch that movie, I watched Black Narcissus just before I started making Last Night in Soho, and there was one shot in it that I had so forgotten that I actually, for ease of use, I got my camera and I recorded it off the screen, and I showed it to my cinematographer saying, "Hey, check this out. I'd forgotten about this shot in Black Narcissus." And it was in a flashback sequence where it's a flashback sequence in a house, and the heroine runs away in distress and runs out of the door into blackness. There's no like translite, there's no exterior. She just runs into the void off the set. And my God, what a shot. And there's a there isn't the same shot in Last Night in Soho, but there's a shot that kind of in a weird way references that, or just the idea that you don't have to have a background. You could just be coming out of black.
So I've read before about your love for American Werewolf in London, and I guess my big stupid question is, what is it about horror films that have always so informed your sensibilities and informed your tastes and your consciousness? What is it about horror?
I think it's that thing is I sort of think, and like I said, it's something in this, like, I think it's like there's a similarity between comedy and horror, in that, like, a comedy is irreverent and a horror is like transgressive. There's something in there that's like sort of the other, or something that's shocking, or something that you shouldn't see or say or do. And that's sort of the same in comedy as well. And it's interesting to me that a lot of horror directors, if you listen to like a John Carpenter commentary for like The Fog or Halloween, when he talks about shocks in movies, he says gags. And he goes, oh yeah, this was a great gag. When the body comes out of the closet, this was a great gag. And I thought, well, that's fascinating. And of course, staging a visual gag and staging like a horror shock are the same thing, because it's about timing and it's about composition and it's about the element of surprise. So there's a lot of crossover. And then, American Werewolf in London, John Landis, who is predominantly a comedy director, he like crosses over in that movie into like horror director just perfectly. It's that weird, it's one of those movies that just like, it feels like alchemy, where like the right director, the right subject matter, the perfect like budget coming off a hit. I mean, whenever I hear them talk about remaking American Werewolf in London now, I always think, good luck. Because that's the thing about that movie is John Landis is coming off two like mega hits. And so John Landis on American Werewolf in London has like money to burn, because what that would cost today to do that movie is just not possible, and not possible in the kind of current climate of like what people think horror films should cost. So sometimes that's what I'm really like fascinated by with movies. Like, I mean, Blood and Black Lace on the flip side is a really interesting one, because Blood and Black Lace is like a very low budget movie that looks like it cost 10 times as much. And so that's the thing that's interesting to sort of really analyze it and think, well, how did he do that? And I think all of Mario Bava's films, like the best of his work, are worth like analyzing if you're interested in filmmaking at all, to see how does he make his movie look 5 times as expensive as it is.
So two things I want to ping off of, and Daria, if you could get ready to cue that trailer. The idea of the perfect marriage of comedy and horror. There's that great Mel Brooks quote about the difference between comedy and tragedy. I'm sure you know it, where he says, tragedy is I have a hangnail. Ooh, it hurts. A hangnail. Oh my gosh, the hangnail keeps getting worse. Comedy is a man walks into an open manhole and dies. And so there's a sort of sense of transgression, the sense of like real horror in comedy that feeds it. And I would argue that you have already struck that note, finding horror in comedy brilliantly, and your little tribute to the great trailers, the great Grindhouse trailers of years past. And I'm going to ask your indulgence as we watch it. It's the trailer for the movie Don't, which I'm still waiting for. It's been years, Edgar. Let's give it a look.
Don't. If you are thinking of opening this door, don't. If you are thinking of checking out the basement, don't. Don't look behind. Don't look inner. Don't look up. Don't look anywhere. Don't scream for help. Don't move a muscle. Don't even breathe. Don't
You know, if we were doing this live, the crowd would have erupted. Don't is fucking masterful, my friend. That is so good.
My
There's
favorite thing at the end of that is the little box that says "based on the terrifying bestseller," which I took straight from the trailer for Michael Winner's The Sentinel.
Michael Winner. Oh my gosh, I've never heard a good story about Michael Winner. What's there's a shot in
His
that
autobiography, if you can stomach it, is actually a really fun read, and he has a great story about the Sentinel. His autobiography was much charming than it has any right to be.
Didn't he do a prequel to The Innocents with Marlon Brando
it's
as the
called,
character?
The Nightcomers with Marlon Brando and Stephanie Beacham. It's a deeply strange movie.
Yeah, there's some S&M going on there too with like a little girl, right? It's a.
I'm not crazy about that movie.
No, it's not.
I do have some time for the Sentinel, which is by turns inept and then suddenly very scary. It actually has a couple of bits in it which you cannot knock it as very effective. I want to say I was quickly during Don't, just because I've seen it before. I looked at some of the chat stuff, and somebody pointed out quite correctly, said the closest that who said this? Closest that British films ever get to giallo is Twisted Nerve, and I would agree with that. And I'm sorry not to bring that one up. What's funny about Twisted Nerve is it stars Billy Whitelaw, whose final film was Hot Fuzz. And when I was working with Billy Whitelaw on Hot Fuzz, I was trying to explain to her that Twisted Nerve was back in the zeitgeist because Tarantino had used the music in Kill Bill Volume 2. Or was it Volume 1? Maybe both. So I was trying to explain that Twisted Nerve was back in the zeitgeist and that everybody had it as their ringtone on their phones. And she humored me to an extent. And over a glass of red wine, whilst I was into the sort of, the 90th second of trying to talk about Twisted Nerve to her, she led forward and she goes, darling, I don't give a shit about Twisted Nerve. And that was the end of the conversation, which is classic Billy Whitelaw. It's funny, sometimes it's people, you forget that sometimes people were in these films and they couldn't care less about them.
Yeah, it's funny. You worked with Diana Rigg, too.
Yeah.
This is going to be her last movie as well, isn't it?
Yes. Unfortunately, there's two people in Last Night in Soho. It's their last movie. Also, Margaret Nolan, who does a small cameo in a very small cameo in Last Night in Soho. It's also her final movie. But yeah, I don't know what to say. It's so sad. All I can say is I'm glad I got to work with them, and what an absolute privilege. And I'm excited for people to see Diana in it. I'm not going to get into that whole story right now because it probably choked me up. But if you're in any way interested about that, I did write a piece in The Guardian about working with her and the last time I saw her, which I would like to direct you to that rather than try and relate the story and get all misty-eyed.
It's really a beautiful piece. I really hope that everyone reads it. In your Don't trailer, there's that scene where the little boy runs towards the camera and then stands up as an adult. Is that
from a Mario Bava film?
Yeah. Which one is it? I couldn't remember this morning. I was trying to figure
it is from Shock. I stole that.
His last movie.
Shock.
His last movie, Shock.
Yes, it is his last movie. Yeah. Yeah, it is. And what's funny is the little boy runs forward and then a cannibal man jumps up. The cannibal man is Simon Pegg in much prosthetic makeup. Now the weird thing is that I delivered Don't to Tarantino and Rodriguez for Grindhouse, and then I didn't see it in the movie until the night it came out. And what I didn't know is that Robert Rodriguez, even though we'd aged the film perfectly and we'd literally taken the 35mm and kicked it around the car park, that Robert Rodriguez had decided to chop a few more frames out to make it look more authentically chopped up, which he didn't need to do. But one of the frames that he chopped out was Simon Pegg's cameo. So I didn't discover this until I was at the cinema on opening night with Simon Pegg. And then Simon Pegg turned around to me and goes, what the fuck happened to my shot? And I was like, I don't know. Luckily, on the DVD, if you have the DVD of Grindhouse, the uncut version of Don't is on there. But it was quite embarrassing that Robert had no idea that was Simon Pegg and decided to splice that frame out. But you're right. That is stolen wholesale from Mario Bava's Shock.
All right, so we only have 5 minutes left. We're on a strict schedule. You're heavy in post-production. You also have a great documentary about the amazing group, musical group Sparks, coming out. So, guys, a lot of great Edgar Wright material coming out.
I know. Strangely, after 4 years of no movies, 2 movies next year.
Indeed. So, I've taken up all this time. I'm sorry if just sort of chatting. Let's take a question or two before we lose Edgar in about 4 minutes.
Have some very good ones, but let's get into this. Let's talk about Mario Bava in the realm of his like historical influences. Like we know the type of films that he liked and was influenced by.
You mean I'm not sure if the question relates to. I know he did some historical movies like Viking movies and like Hercules movies. I must admit those ones I'm not so familiar with. Although weirdly, I did see Hercules in the Haunted World with the LA Opera, which was quite an experience. Some of the other films that he did, like the historical, I must admit, I kind of like, as you might imagine, gravitated towards all of the horror titles and the sci-fi ones like Planet of the Vampires. So there's still a few like Mario Bava films I haven't seen. And I don't know if it's in your library, but Tim Lucas has this absolute doorstop, probably the heaviest film book I've ever seen. Tim Lucas's doorstopper called All the Colors of the Dark about Mario Bava, which is extraordinary. I mean, not inexpensive as a massive coffee table book. You need to have a heavyweight coffee table to take it, but it is everything you would want to know about Mario Bava.
I would say really quickly about Bava. His father, Eugenio, was a sculptor who worked in a lot of movies during Mussolini's period, and that's where Bava got sort of the younger Bava got sort of his start, and he was a storyboard artist as well. He storyboarded all of his movies, so they're all very carefully planned out. His son Lamberto became a film director as well. Did a great movie called Demons, you may or may not be familiar with, but yeah. I guess other questions.
Yeah, this question, the best I understood it was more about like Bava's upbringing, how he got into film, why he was like working under like budget constraints so well. But we have all these rapid questions coming in. Let's see real quick if there's anything you guys want to answer here.
I will say that I think
I didn't answer that question, but if I direct you to the Tim Lucas book, it literally will tell you everything you need to know.
Oh yeah, and I must say too that I was always a fan of Sparks, but until I watched your movie, I didn't realize how much I loved them and how important they were in the history of music. Holy crap, they're everywhere, and it's really a remarkable piece. 2 movies next year, you guys, from Edgar Wright. What a treat, right?
Yes. Yes, it is. Edgar, this one actually I really like. You were talking about watching movies with the sound off, but you were kind of forced into that situation at a particular time. Is there any modern film that you think we can watch without the sound off and understand what happened because of the direction?
Oh yeah, tons. I mean, I think any like really good piece of visual storytelling, you could do that. I mean, some obvious examples off the top of my head would be like Gravity, Alfonso Cuarón's film, like Mad Max Fury Road. What are some other ones like? So I mean, those are 2 off the top of my head that I think like you could watch them with the sound turned off and completely understand what's going on, just because of the great visual storytelling.
Under the Skin, I watched that without the sound once. Just gorgeous stuff. All right. Well, I want to really respect your time. You're in post-production now on a movie that I can't wait to see, especially knowing that it's going to be a horror movie kind of, or psychological thriller that you've described it as. I'm not asking you to tell me more about it. It's fine. The best way we can, maybe in chat, everybody give a great thank you for your time today. I know it's in short supply. It means so much to the Denver Public Library and to the group here. That you gave a little bit of it today to sort of showcase the Denver Public Library stay-at-home events. We're in a weird time in our history, and to be able to reach out and spend an afternoon together is an amazing blessing. So, Edgar, I can't thank you enough for your generosity and for your artistry. I can't wait to see the next chapter of your story. Thank you so much, my friend.
Edgar,
Thanks for
thank
having me.
you. We're so thankful. I promise you, this is like the best thing that happened to the library patrons all year. So thank you.
Oh, that's very sweet. Hopefully I'll get to see you guys in person at some point.
Can't wait. Take care.
Bye.